Welcome to 28.5, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and support and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to 28.5. Sid and I are here, and we're ready for episode 2, where we're going to dig into all the major changes going on in and around the women's game. First up is National Letter of Intent. Sid, you ready?
I'm ready for this. Lots of juiciness and all these changes. It's going to be fun.
All new stuff, all new nuggets. So first up is the National Letter of Intent, where, long story short, it's going to kind of disappear. It used to be kind of your contract with the school that you would sign and say you were going there. Some people do it their senior year, junior, or even late sophomore. But for that to change and just kind of be erased after being in place for 60 years, it's a huge change to the game and just overall levels of commitment between players and coaches and schools. It's pretty crazy, right? How would you feel knowing like the whole type of commitment level is going to change between you and the school?
Yeah, it's so different. I think about how excited you were to sign that letter of intent, and it really locked you in for a full year with that school. So it kind of gave the player a little bit of grace knowing that you were going to have 2 full semesters if you signed a full scholarship paid for, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see how some of that changes with the NCAA letter of intent going away, and now they're putting it on the universities to essentially sign contracts with players. Really a different spin on it, with the idea that it puts more negotiation control in the hands of parents and soon-to-be college kids, which I'm not so sure how I feel about that, but it's essentially what it's doing. What do you think that's going to do with some of the NIL implications, Becca?
Oh, man. I think that's always been a fear going into this NIL change. Some schools are bigger. Some schools have more levers to pull, pockets to pull from. If you look at LSU last year, when they had Angel Reese, Haley Van Lith, they had a lot of people that they were able to kind of get in and get on their team. They had a lot of hype around it, which obviously translates into dollars. So you just look at other schools that, maybe they're small D1s or even D2s, and it's like, how are we going to lock in these players when they could potentially be making money elsewhere and also have a contract that kind of solidifies that or gives them the necessary support to feel like they're going to make money while they're in school?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a change, and one that we wanted to highlight today.
All right. So the transfer portal window, originally that was always 45 days. So when you put your name into the transfer portal, you had 45 days to just kind of let schools know that you're out there, be seen, be visible. Basically, hey, I'm shopping, I'm available. So that's going to get cut down to 30 days. And the reason behind that was the NCAA did some deep dives and some data findings to figure out that a lot of times people in the transfer portal, they're normally picked up within the first 4 weeks, aka 30 days. So they decided that they would shorten that window. And for the women's game, it's going to be from March 25th to April 23rd. Okay, so Sid, let's jump in and start talking about this transfer portal. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, the transfer portal. I'm not the biggest fan, mostly because transferring was seen as a way out for us when we played. So you just didn't transfer, right, for the most part. And obviously there were some transfers and some good reasons why folks did transfer, but certainly not to the level that players are transferring today. And as we mentioned, they shortened the window on it, but we're still going to see a ton of transfers happening every year. So over 1,000 women's basketball transfers from last season heading into this season. Just a huge number, right? So players really hopping around from school to school at that point. Are they focusing on school at all? I would beg to say no. And they're really going to go after whatever program they want to play for. And if things aren't working out, they have the freedom to jump and that's that transfer portal. So not the biggest fan, but I do think that there are a ton of interesting transfers that did happen this year. It's going to be really fun to watch some of those players wearing different uniforms this year. I will kick it over to you, Becca, to highlight some of those transfers that you're most interested in.
Yeah. So I don't know if everyone caught last season, the Stanford women's basketball program was dominating because of Kiki Irafin. Absolute awesome post player, stretch four, handled it, brought the ball up, took people off the drive. She was absolutely amazing. There were times they were down, I think, 15 to 20, and she just single-handedly got the ball in one-on-one situations and brought them back. So I was beyond impressed with her gameplay, and to see she's leaving Stanford and is now committed to USC is huge. I mean, when you look at the talent that USC has with, Juju, and there's a couple others that we'll probably hit on, but like to add Kiki to that roster and just give them another dynamic threat from the inside, that's amazing. Like I'm hyped for them. What about you?
USC is going to be so much fun to watch this year, and I think to myself, how do they not make a Final Four? I don't want to jinx them. Like they're so loaded, right? So they're really going to be a team this year that's going to be a ton of fun to watch. And I'm thinking that they should make a deep tournament run. Should they be clicking? Should they be meshing? Should there not be any, knock on wood, crazy injuries this year? USC is going to be one of those top teams for sure to watch this year.
Completely agree. So let's jump to LSU. Last year had a ton of transfers, and it was like the team that was the most hype, right? You had Haley Van Lith there. And in the beginning of the season, they kind of struggled, right? They lost their opening game to an unranked team. And then also just they were trying to gel and figure one another out with their roles. Let's talk about Haley Van Lith making another change this upcoming season.
Yeah, this is when I mentioned making a change 3 times. This is it. Haley Van Lith, this is her third transfer. So she starts at Louisville. Technically, maybe her second transfer. She starts at Louisville, transfers to LSU, as you mentioned, and now she's at TCU. Did Kim Mulkey get under her skin a little bit and probably push her in ways she hadn't been pushed? Maybe. I mean, I think that's possible. I think Kim Mulkey is one of those more old school coaches and probably is pretty tough on her point guards. I don't know, watching a lot of the games last year, if Haley Van Lith truly jived with what Kim Mulkey was putting down and what she was expecting out of her. Totally just a spectator watching that. I could be completely wrong on that. Who am I to judge? But it kind of speaks volumes when she transfers out after 1 year. And she had the hype in both those programs when she was leaving, right? She was talked about a ton when she left Louisville, talked about maybe not as much when she left LSU. So you kind of see maybe why she leaves, and now she's headed to TCU. I think TCU is an interesting one because they last year had a weird situation where they didn't have enough players. They had too many injuries, and they had to hold tryouts in the middle of season.
Oh, man, that's right.
Yeah. Do you remember that?
I
Crazy.
do. Nuts.
So now I really think they're trying to reload, and what a grab for them. I mean, you can't hate TCU for picking up Haley Van Lith. That's a heck of a point guard right there who has a ton of experience. She played on the 3-on-3 USA team over the summer. Mm-hmm. She's played on back-to-back teams that really made deep tournament runs, were at the top of their conferences. And so that's an interesting one. She certainly played with a lot of star power as well, right? She played with Angel Reese last year, and a lot of drama on that team last year. Remember, there was a point where Angel Reese wasn't playing, and nobody really knew why. And so it's interesting to see her join TCU of all places. I don't really think of TCU as a women's basketball storybook program by any means, whereas Louisville and LSU are on that scene. So it'll be interesting to see what she does at TCU. I mean, I hope she does well. It's fun to watch her when she's playing and she's knocking down shots and distributing the ball and being the point guard she's capable of being.
Yeah, and then just to add, we don't really know how their NIL deals factor into this or if it's part of the bargaining process as well. So just another layer of just complexity that gets added to college basketball transfer portals. I mean, back in our day, Sid, when you transferred, you had to sit out a full year once you got to that school. So for this change to go into effect, and then basically you can just transfer every year and then play instantly. I mean, I know you and I have chatted on this before. It's tough to try to find like loyalty, right? And I'm
Yep.
not saying things are perfect all the time in college and while you're playing a sport, but there's always going to be adversity. And it's like, how do we get through that and realize this is temporary? Because shit happens in life and it's temporary, and we get through it and move on and we're better for it. So I know we mentioned before, everybody has their own experiences and they go through different things. But with NIL, it just makes it so much more messy. The more money's involved and advertising, recruitment. I mean, it definitely adds a layer of complexity.
And Becca, what about the next transfer we want to highlight here with Reagan Beers? Is she not one of your favorite centers in the game right now?
You know, she had a great year at Oregon State. The Beavers really had a big year. I think they went pretty far in the tournament. She was averaging a double-double, 17 points, 10 boards. Not only that, but like a super good shooter, 66% from the field, Pac-12's freshman and sixth player of the year in 23. Like she's not only a young star, but like she's really like holding her own. And she's not the only Beaver that we have in the transfer portal, but for her to make the move to the Oklahoma Sooners, they got a huge lottery pick. I know she's going to love the coaching staff there. The Sooners definitely needed some size to add to their team. But man, the Beavers taking another loss it makes you think like what's going on, or maybe they just had a better opportunity elsewhere and they're going to jump to the Sooners and see how she can impact that team.
I'm super excited to watch that. And they'll be in the SEC. We're going to highlight some of those conference changes coming up here. But I think she's one of the best centers in the game right now. So watching her play and have to play in that whole new conference is going to be really interesting and entertaining this year. I also think about Georgia Amore, who is also going to be joining the SEC. She makes the transfer from Virginia Tech to the Kentucky Wildcats, which is going to be really cool to watch this year. And we talk about Beers being one of the best centers in the game. I think that Georgia is one of the best guards in the game right now. She's explosive. She's only 5'6". She certainly doesn't play like it. So I think that's going to be a really fun one to watch also. She averaged 18.8 points per game last year, which is monster for a guard of her size. She also averaged 6.8 assists last year, which is really phenomenal. I mean, if you're a shooter or a post player and you're getting to play with Georgia, that's great for you. She's going to distribute the ball to you and really be that point guard that you want on your team. So I think she's going to be a fun one to watch at Kentucky also.
Yeah, absolutely. For somebody to have such a high points per game average as well as assists, that tells you not only are they running really high tempo, but she's able to score, distribute, and just make an impact in the game to make sure they win. I think that's, if I've listened to a couple of her interviews, and she just wants to win. She's a diehard competitor, so excited to see what she can do at Kentucky.
Yeah, and really we only picked 4 players to highlight, but as I mentioned, there were over 1,000 this year, so really is going to look a lot different for some of these players who are going to be wearing some different uniforms this year, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch them, none the least. And want to jump into the next big change heading into this year that we wanted to highlight, and that is some of these conference shifts that are happening. Arguably the biggest change coming into this year. I think basketball, it's fair to say men's and women's basketball follows football. Certainly a lot of these conference shifts that happened, you can pinpoint why they happened, and that's really a football play. But there's no reason why basketball can't benefit from some of that. There's a couple conferences that got really strong and even stronger overnight. And one that we're going to see what happens with it, and that is the Pac-12. It's dissolved, and now it's come back, and we've got a couple of current members that are going to go through 2025. So you've got Oregon State and Washington State that are really holding down the conference right now. There are going to be 4 new members that are going to be joining in Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State. You must have state to enter this conference at the end of your school name, apparently. But it's interesting to see that these teams are jumping on board, and the Pac-12 will stay afloat. I will mention, though, that the Pac-12 is operating as a 2-team conference for the 2024-2025 academic year, which I mentioned. The conference is still required to add 2 more schools to meet the NCAA's minimum requirement of 8 teams. So they're still on the hunt. they will need to add another 2 teams. It'll be interesting to see who joins the newly formed Pac-12.
Well, they better have state in their name, right? Like
apparently.
That's nuts. When I first saw this, that the Pac-12 was down to 2 teams, it kind of just baffled my mind. Obviously, a lot of moves for the reasons of dollars and cents, but what a change to just a conference that's been known, right? When we played, we had so many of those signature schools that kind of anchored these conferences, not just the Pac-12, but others that have large changes as well. So I'm glad to see it's not completely dissolving. Those media rights are holding strong, and they're still going to have a conference. It's just going to take some rebuilding. But another conference that I want to jump to that has some crazy changes that I couldn't even begin to figure out as an athlete with the travel schedule is the Big Ten has added USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. Can you just think about the Big Ten schools, mostly located in the Midwest, and having to come over from the West Coast to play your games? I just remember back in the day, whether we were at Maryland or we're at St. John's and it's a late game. Thankfully, we were able to have charter flights, so we flew home right away. But now you're adding not only hours, but time zones. The adjustment period for these athletes to not only get there and make sure they have enough buffer time for film, walkthrough, scouting reports, meals, but just overall adjustment to the timing. It's absolutely crazy. Sid, what do you think?
I think back to our travel days, and you just played a game at night. You have to shower, get on the bus, get on the plane, fly home, and get it back on the bus, takes you back to campus. You drive home, and there were nights we were getting home at 1, 2 in the morning. And so I can't imagine traveling across country and how all of this works. I think ADs are going to have to get creative and maybe reinvent some of this. And honestly, Becca, you and I mean, we chartered pretty much everywhere, right?
Yep.
So are they doing that at all of these Big Ten schools? They're going to have to, because it's really putting a lot on these student athletes, I think. And it's different than football, where you play once a week. These conferences, I mean, you're playing conference games twice a week, and basketball also spans both semesters. So it's a lot on a student athlete to stay eligible, focus on school, and add all these travel miles. And as you mentioned, time zone changes to some of that. It makes it that much more challenging to me on the student athlete. And we look at the Big Ten, and you've got those West Coast schools who are now flying all the way across the country and playing East Coast schools like Rutgers and Maryland. And then you've got everyone in between that makes up the rest of the Big Ten in the Midwest there. That's a big conference geographically. So like I said, ADs are going to have to be creative in how they schedule some of this for sure.
I am interested in seeing that USC team come to the Midwest and play some of these Big Ten teams, though. That's going to be so good.
Yes, I'm equally excited for that. And I think about some of the West Coast talent that we didn't watch a whole lot being in the Eastern and Central time zones. And now we're going to be able to watch Juju play all these Big Ten schools with us being in the Midwest here. That's going to be a lot of fun. So in some regards, the fans are going to make out here a little bit that, the conferences got bigger and they're adding in 4 new teams from the West Coast that really mix things up quite a bit. So Sabrina Ionescu, I didn't watch her a ton when she was at Oregon because of the time zone change. If she was at Oregon now, I'd be watching her all the time in the Big Ten. So that's a prime example of how we're going to be able to watch some of these athletes from the West Coast. And you'll see a lot of those athletes go to these big schools. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't you go play basketball at UCLA or USC or Washington or Oregon? I mean, that's great. I think it's a huge opportunity. And you look at Juju and what she was able to do, that fan base she's already created across the country, certainly, but even more so on the West Coast. And now you've got little girls that are sitting here in the Midwest that are going to be watching her a lot more this year. And I think for her and Kiki at UCLA, they're going to only expand their fan base by now playing all over the country, which is also a huge opportunity for them. So definitely some pros in some of this too. It's just a lot. I think that travel schedule is what is a little bit daunting if you ask me, but they'll get through it. And before you know it, it's going to be the norm and we'll have forgot about this change. But it's an interesting one. It's definitely a big change. And I think about Big Ten adding those 4 schools and the SEC adding another big 2 in Texas and Oklahoma. Obviously, football wise, huge ads, but for women's basketball also. Texas had a phenomenal year last year. I mean, there was a point where I was like, man, this team could be in the national championship, hands down. They're well coached. They have a ton of athletes. They're going to be healthier this year. So I really think Texas is going to be one of those premier teams to try to beat this year in the SEC. And then Oklahoma's had a good several teams over the previous years. So also a really good women's basketball program in school. So those 2 joining the SEC also got stronger in women's basketball. So it's going to be a showdown, just like in football, right? Big Ten and SEC kind of are taking the cake right now. I think we're going to see that in some of the women's basketball landscape, with the exception of the ACC. Why don't you take that one, Becca?
Yes, the old ACC. They're adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU. So talking about one of our main transfer portal players, getting to see her leave Stanford and join USC, Stanford's going to have to reload pretty quick. And I'm super excited to see what they do against Notre Dame. I know they're pumped to see them, and a lot of folks are pumped to see that matchup just because it's one where Stanford kind of always recruits the same players to some degree as Notre Dame. They have a lot of the same styles in the coaching staff that was there. We'll have a change coming up on that here in a bit. But also West Coast schools, again, it's just adding to that travel time. It's adding to that experience in a different coast and the play that might change there and just the style. I think that's one thing that a lot of these different conferences have is style, and you don't really know how aggressive or how fast or what the tempo is until you really play in it. And I think that's going to be an early adjustment for a lot of these teams as the changes are happening and new schools are trying to learn new schools and their style of play. So definitely exciting news there. Our last big change is the Big 12 adding Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. So Sid, do you have anything you want to highlight there?
I think the Big 12 traditionally has been an okay women's basketball conference. I think they'll continue to be an okay women's basketball conference. I think Colorado made some waves. Arizona State and Arizona have been making some waves. Utah have as well. They seem to be a step behind some of these bigger conferences, but as you and I both know, you could see any of these teams from the Big 12 make a splash in the tournament, get hot, peak at the right time, and really make a push. And they'll play tough enough games all year where they will be prepared like some of these other schools. And we could see the Big 12 continue to kind of linger and be around and maybe have a school or two that, like I said, does make a big push in the tournament, which would be kind of fun. I do want to see some good parity in the women's game. So I'm hoping that you've got a conference like the Big 12 that can put a couple teams through that, make a Sweet 16 or an Elite 8 and kind of mix things up a bit. And I think the Big 12 is capable of doing that. I want to go back to your comment about the ACC and Notre Dame and Stanford. And I will attest that you all were some of the most IQ'd players out there. I remember back in the day having to scout for Notre Dame when we played you guys a couple of times and Stanford every year. And those scouting reports were pretty thick. And the complexity of what you all ran. And so I think that one's going to be a really interesting one also is watching Stanford play Notre Dame year in and year out in the same conference is really a cool one. I do think it is weird to have Stanford in the ACC though. Stanford consistently playing Wake Forest and Florida State and some of these other schools that it's just a little bit different because I solidly think about Stanford being in the Pac-12 and being over there on the West Coast. And now they're going to be really thrown in the mix with all these other schools over on the East Coast primarily. So that's going to be, I think, a really different change up in the women's basketball landscape. And with Stanford, Cal, and SMU in the ACC, like you mentioned, that's going to be a fun one to watch. But I do want to ask you, Becca, what new conference matchups are you most eager to see heading into the season?
Ooh, man. So honestly, being from the Midwest, we grew up watching the Big Ten, and I just think that the UCLA, USC versus Iowa, they're rebuilding, reloading, new coach, new player there. The Ohio State, always Kevin McGuff always has his team ready to go. And then Indiana has kind of been a basketball powerhouse as of recently, just consistently having great players, having a great game plan as well. Their head coach is awesome. I'm just excited to see those big time players from USC and UCLA come to the Midwest and learn what the Midwest game's all about, but also how the Big Ten teams adjust to it. Because I think it's going to be so different, but it's going to be so fun to just see them adjust on the fly, halftime transitions, what we're changing, and just to see the Big Ten grow and expand with some celeb status, right? You have Caitlin Clark she's moved on. Now you got Juju Watson coming in. And we know the Midwest loves women's basketball. So I'm excited to see the West Coast meet the Midwest.
Yeah, that's going to be super fun. For me, keeping it in the SEC, I am excited to watch Texas and see how they mesh with the South Carolinas, the LSUs. Kentucky should be pretty good this year. That's going to be, for me, what I'm most eager to see and excited to watch is how Texas folds into the SEC and what those matchups look like. That's going to be a fun one, I think, for sure. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition into the next changes we want to highlight, and those are those coaching changes. So they happen every year, but I think this year, with a couple big powerhouse franchise coaches stepping down, it's really a big year of coaching changes heading into this season. So I think we all are used to seeing Tara Vanderveer being the queen over there at Stanford, right? She's the winningest coach ever, and she stepped down after last year. So to see Kate Pay step in, who's been her long-time right-hand woman, is really kind of cool to watch. I'm excited for Kate Pay. I think she has the capability of really picking the program right back up, and it's not going to miss a beat. It shouldn't miss a beat because she's learned so much from Tara and has been a pivotal part of that coaching staff. So to see her get that job, I think is really cool for her and for Stanford and what they're all about. So that's a big one that's happening this year. What's the one that you want to highlight the most here, Becca, that sticks out to you?
So going from the head coach stepping down and an assistant stepping up, that's got to be the Iowa Hawkeyes, right? So it's just like Stanford at Iowa, Jan Jensen, who's been their assistant coach for years and years, decades plus. She is stepping up as the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes, as Lisa Bluter, who's been there for over 30 years, is stepping down, enjoying an early retirement and her mark on the women's game. She had such a great couple years at the end there with Caitlin Clark and the runs they made to make it to the national championship games. I mean, what a way to go out. I would have loved, as I'm sure all Hawkeyes would have loved, for them to get a championship under their belt. But Lisa has just really made an impact on the game in the state of Iowa, as is Jan. Going through my recruitment, Jan was always somebody I could reach out to, talk to. And while I was training girls, I was training some AAU girls, and I would reach out to her and she'd be very upfront, honest. Yeah, we have room. No, we don't. Hey, what do you got? What kind of guards you got over there? She's just very personable, very responsive. And you could tell she just really cares about her players. That's Iowa Hawkeye 101. You can tell they are a family. They share that, they show that. And with Lisa stepping down and Jan just stepping right in, they even suggest it's not really a change at all because Jan's just been there from the beginning. So they're just going to have a lot of consistency there with the program, but maybe a few tweaks that Jan's been having in her pocket for a while. Sid, I do want to mention there's been another big change at your alma mater. Do you want to dig into the Tennessee change?
Yeah, sure. Big change. Kelly Harper, Kelly Jolly, as some of us know her, since she was a Lady Vol back in the day, won back to back to back national championships. But she was at the helm coaching the Lady Vols the past few years here and was let go. And we have Kim Caldwell, who has stepped up and has taken the head job at Tennessee. I think it caught a lot of us off guard a little bit. A lot of us had never heard about Kim Caldwell. She comes from Marshall. Not a ton of big time experience, but from the sounds of it, she runs a fast paced game. Looks to go to the three ball quite a bit, and I think we're excited for some of that pace that she promises to bring. I will say it's huge shoes to fill. Obviously, the legacy that Pat Summitt brings with that job, and the weight that brings when anyone would try to take that over. So, as a former Lady Vol, I wish her all the success in the world. I think she has a mountain to climb in some regards because we have seen Tennessee drop off where we're not that premier team like we know we're capable of being and have been in the past for decades. So can she turn that around for us? Can she make us relevant like we're capable of being? We certainly have the fan base. We certainly have recruits and players that are capable of doing it. So I'm really interested to see how this goes this year for Kim. I hope it goes well. I hope she can make a big splash. That would be amazing. 10 games into the season and we're all looking at each other like, what's happening in Tennessee? They're back on the map. They're a team to beat again. I hope she can bring it. It's going to be, like I said, a tough putt, but she's capable of it from what I'm hearing. And we wish her all the best. I think we have to at this point because we really want our program and the Lady Vols to continue to be a successful program. And if we don't turn it around now, it might be lost for a very long time. So really wishing Kim the best and excited to watch what the Lady Vols can do this season. I will say there's another big one in the SEC that's worth highlighting, and that is Kenny Brooks to Kentucky. This is a big coaching change. He comes from Virginia Tech. Obviously, he saw a lot of success there and is now taking over for the Kentucky Wildcats. And I think Kenny Brooks is going to make Kentucky even more relevant in the SEC, and they're going to be one of those teams that are going to be fun to watch this year. And he's got Georgia Amore, who's transferring along with him. So he's able to bring in that steady guard who brings in, the points and the assists every game. And Kentucky's going to be one of those tough teams for sure this year that the SEC is going to have to contend with. And wouldn't be surprised if they make a deep tournament run, to be honest. So that'll be fun to watch. So I think there's a lot happening there. And Becca, your old peer, Megan Duffy, who played at Notre Dame just before you did, then stepping in and taking that Virginia Tech job, which is cool to see also. Where did Megan Duffy, what program did she come from?
Yeah, so Megan Duffy, former Notre Dame alumni, bud. She is now at Virginia Tech, as you mentioned, but she previously was at Marquette. They played their first couple rounds at Notre Dame, so I was able to see them and my fellow Notre Damers play. And man, she's really changed that program around. They were really high tempo, running and gunning. They had some really great players that she was able to develop, especially in the post. One of those players now is at Notre Dame. So thank you for that development. But for her to come up, I believe she was at Miami of Ohio and then Marquette. And now for her to take over Virginia Tech, it's a big jump. It's an awesome opportunity for her. And I know she's going to probably hit the transfer portal just like a lot of folks, beef up her program and be ready to have those girls competitive and ready to go.
Yeah, good for Megan Duffy. Fun to see her continue to climb the coach's ladder there and really get that big head coaching job at Virginia Tech. Really cool to see. And with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude today's episode. So a lot of changes that we talked about. We talked about the national letter of intent going away. We talked about the transfer portal window getting shortened from 45 days to 30 days. Talked about all those transfers and highlighted a few of them that we think are going to be fun to watch this year. We talked about those conference shifts, all the changes that are happening with the Pac-12 and the additions to the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, really shaking things up this year, which is going to be unprecedented when we watch women's basketball this year on all of those conference changes. And then some of these big coaching changes that happen from last season to this season. So a lot we were able to highlight. As we mentioned, there are a lot of changes heading into this season, but really makes it exciting, keeps us on our toes. And it's going to be fun to highlight some of those big games this year, especially with some of those conference matchups. And I will say that we will be dropping episode 3. And as we mentioned, we will be dropping new episodes every Friday. So episode 3 will drop November 1st. And we look forward to highlighting the upcoming week matchups that are going to be happening the opening week, that following week. So we really want to dive into some of those first matchups that we think are going to be fun to watch, those first games that are going to be some big headliners, and then also do a deep dive on the CBS top 10 preseason player list. Obviously, it's preseason. A lot of these players have to still go out there and show out to be on this postseason player list, but there are a lot of females out there who are really playing this game at a high level, and that top 10 list is, whoo, it's fire. I think there's going to be some good drama, some good matchups this year, maybe some rivalries a brewing among some of these big players. So really looking forward to highlighting that and discussing it with you all. Becca, it's been fun with episode 2 here. Looking forward to episode 3.
Sounds good. I'll be there, and I can't wait because basketball's back.
Heck yeah, let's go. Okay, talk to you all next Friday.
See ya.
Bye.
That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow on your preferred podcast platforms to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.